You're listening
to Real Mysteries.
Episode 7. I'm Brenda Bennett. At this time, we're at about the halfway point in our podcast series, and we want you to know that we're discovering much of this info and putting the puzzle pieces together right along with you. We find that we have to be fluid and flexible as we schedule interviews with our guests and weave their comments in with the evidence and questions associated with this complex multi-murder case, and then figure out how to present it to you. We've decided to postpone our presentation of details regarding the trials of Mcveigh and Nichols, and instead bring to you a remarkable story that was just recently told to Melody Hoppers. Melody is the daughter of Real Mysteries producer Ken Sarkey. It is unique in how it touches on so many aspects of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, from the pain and tragic loss, rescue and recovery, to what it was like to actually be in the courtroom during the trials of Timothy Mcveigh and Terry Nichols. But this is also the story of two lives remarkably connected because of, or maybe I should say, in spite of, the Murrah Federal Building catastrophe. Here's Melody Hoppers.
I was at my grandmother's 92nd birthday party when my dad told me about this podcast series, Real Mysteries, that he's been working on. He wanted me to listen to it and give him some feedback. That was on Saturday. Monday morning, on my way to work, I listened to the first episode, which I thought was really moving. I walked into the physical therapy clinic where I'm a therapist and, like most Monday mornings, was in kind of a haze from the weekend and trying to break said haze with coffee. My very first patient that morning was this woman.
My name is Catherine Alani Simons.
Catherine has a shoulder injury and requires about 20 minutes of stretching by a therapist. I had her lay on her back on a table, and we began to talk as I began to stretch her arm. This is by far my favorite part of my job. I get to see people from all different walks of life share with me their stories. I've had men who were struck with PTSD from the Vietnam War open up to me for the first time about their experiences. I've had people share with me the skeletons in their closets. And of course, I've also had people cry or get up off the table and walk out because of the pain or fall asleep and snore. I never know what'll come of these 20 minutes. But Catherine's story, I just couldn't believe the timing of her sharing her experiences with me. We hit it off right away, and after only minutes of small talk, she began to share her story with me.
My parents had me when they were 16, and my dad was 18, and so I really grew up with my parents. And I'm an only child, so we were very, very close. Between my sophomore and my senior year, we moved 8 times. Right before we got to Oklahoma, we were stationed in Eagle Pass, Texas. And I graduated high school in Corpus Christi, where I married my high school sweetheart. And we got married June 29th of 1990, and he was shipped to Desert Shield in August. And when he got shipped over, I moved back to Eagle Pass with my parents and was there for 6 months. Didn't realize when I had moved back there that I was pregnant. And so when February 27th of 1991 came around, I was 6 months pregnant and found out that my husband was killed in Iraq.
Catherine was 19 years old when she found out her husband had been killed. And even worse, he was killed by friendly fire in the war. They'd only been married 8 months. The special bond she had with her parents helped her to get through such an awful tragedy, and she ended up moving to Oklahoma with her parents when her father was transferred to Oklahoma City.
My father was Claude Arthur Medeiros. He was a senior special agent with U.S. Customs, and their job was things like gun running, drug smuggling, things of that nature that came into the U.S. He didn't do so much with illegal aliens or anything like that, like Customs is usually known for. His was mainly drugs and weapons.
By 1995, Catherine and her family had been in Oklahoma 4 years. Her father's office was in the Alfred P. Murrah building. Here's Catherine's account of the morning of April 19th, 1995.
That morning, I got a phone call, and it was my cousin asking if I had felt or heard that. And I was half asleep, and I felt or heard what, and she said there was a big explosion downtown. And so I got up and turned on the TV, and the news came across and said it was the federal building, or the federal courthouse, that was hit. And as soon as I heard the word federal, I immediately thought of my dad. And being an only child, I was spoiled rotten, and my dad always answered my calls and always called me right back if I paged him. And I called him as soon as I heard that it was a federal building, and he didn't answer. So I called my mom, and she didn't answer. And at that time, I just got my kids up and dressed and went over to my mom's, and she was sitting on the floor rocking back and forth with the cordless phone waiting for my dad to call. And I knelt down next to her and said, "Mom, Dad's going to be okay, because God wouldn't do this to both of us."
How did you find out that your father was in the building and didn't survive?
Well, at first we didn't know he didn't survive, because at first his secretary, Priscilla Salyers, she was in the building, but she was rescued. And she was actually one of the ones that the rescue workers had reached, and then the second bomb scare came and they made all the rescuers leave the building. And she's yelling, "Please don't leave me, please don't leave me." And they said, "I promise we will come back to you." And so when they were cleared to go back in, they went and got her out. And on the way to the hospital, she told them that my dad was in the office. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was actually supposed to be at the prison in El Reno interviewing an inmate, and he had only stopped by the office to make a phone call. And his desk was on the 5th floor, right in the back of his chair faced the street. And so that was right where the biggest portion of the building was hit, and he slid down into the pit. So it took 9 days to find his body.
Wow. Can you describe at all what the emotions were like when you found out the news that he did not survive?
During Desert Storm, my mom told me not to worry till they come to your door. And we never used the front door. Only strangers used the front door at my mom and dad's house. Everybody went to the back door. And the first night, they came to the door, and they went to the front door. And I walked over there, and my mom opened the door, and all I saw were police coats and customs coats, and I just lost it. And I fell to the ground. I was 4 months pregnant with my youngest daughter at this time, and I just fell to the ground screaming because, at that point, we're still holding on to hope. And they said, no, we don't know anything. We're just here to offer support. So then 9 days later, my mom had told them, when you find him, do not come notify me. Just call me on the phone. And so I'll never forget her getting that phone call. And it's like that rush of emotion hit me again. And it's paralyzing. And it's devastating. And it's something you never want to hear.
So, after first losing her husband in the Desert Storm conflict in Iraq, and now losing her father in the Oklahoma City bombing, Catherine was completely devastated. She and her mother gathered every ounce of strength and courage they could find to face the future together. And they would need it, as they were both asked to testify in 1997 as victims' impact witnesses against Timothy Mcveigh and Terry Nichols, who was tried separately 6 months later. Because of the magnitude and emotional impact of this case, the defendants claimed they could not receive a fair trial in Oklahoma City and requested a change of location. The motion was granted, and the trials were moved to Denver, Colorado. In order for the witnesses, victims, or family members to participate in the trials, they had to put their lives on hold, travel to and stay in Denver for an unknown amount of time.
Tell us a little bit about your involvement with the trial of Timothy Mcveigh and Terry Nichols.
My mother was called to testify in Mcveigh's, and anybody that was testifying could bring somebody with them, and of course, my mom always took me. I didn't testify in Mcveigh's, I testified in Nichols. They thought my testimony would have a bigger impact on Nichols than my mom's in Mcveigh. I had gone through a major tragedy, and my dad was such a part of my life and part of healing that they figured it would be harder to get a conviction for Nichols, and so they wanted something that had a little more impact for the witness statements. They chose me to speak for Nichols' trial, and basically everything that was said was just a brief history of losing my husband in Desert Storm, and then, getting a hardship transfer back here, and then having my dad's life taken away at such a young age. And really, that's what we were called to testify for, is how it impacted our life.
Can you kind of set the tone for what Denver was like for the Mcveigh and Nichols trials when you were in Denver?
It's crazy because the mentality of Colorado people are very similar to Oklahomans. Very open, very caring. People would go and stand in line at the courthouse for us, and that way we didn't have to get there at 4 o'clock in the morning to get a seat. So people that lived there would take the time, and they would go stand in line for us so that when we got there, we could go right in. And, it's just things like that were happening left and right for us. And the outpouring of love was just amazing. And it's something I'm going to be forever grateful for.
The courtroom was a hard place to endure. Each phase was a lengthy, painful process. The jury selection, the presentations of the attorneys, the submission of evidence, hearing the testimonies of the witnesses, then waiting for the jury's deliberation, verdict, and sentencing.
The first time we flew over, it was right before Christmas, and they sent us all home to wait for the jury. During the Nichols trial, when I was on the plane going to Denver, a man walked on the plane and sat right behind me. And when he was walking past me, I hit my mom, and she's like, "Oh my God, stop it." And so when we landed in Denver, and the U.S. Attorney, Pat Ryan, asked us to stay on the plane if we were there to testify, and asked everybody else to, get off the plane, that he could give us further instructions. This guy stayed on the plane. I was like, yeah. So then we got to talking, and by this point, I had already been working with the Catholic Church, that was the safe haven for all the impact witnesses and all the people there for the trial, for us to go and not be bombarded by the media. And that's who I was working with, the homeless. And they sort and wrap all the presents for a big Christmas party that they throw them. So since I had already been there and had been working with them, the priest asked if I could get together a group to help sort and wrap presents. I said, I know the perfect people. So when he got off the plane with us, we went and ate breakfast, and then I said, hey, do you think you could get the officers to help out? So he got a group together, and that's what we did on our free time, is wrap and sort Christmas presents. So we got to know each other.
So you all met on the plane on the way to the trial.
Mm-hmm.
How neat. Had you seen him before?
I saw him when my mom was testifying in the bombing, and right before that, the In Your Name book came out, and his picture was in it. And I told Mom, I was like, look, this guy is pretty cute. He looks like Sylvester Stallone. And so when he walked on the plane, I kind of had an idea that was him, but I wasn't sure until he stayed on the plane. I was like, yeah, that was him.
The picture Catherine is referring to is in the book that Kathy Keating and several others published shortly after the bombing called In Their Name. There's a picture in the book of a firefighter, a man in clothes soaked in water, and 2 Oklahoma City police officers standing over a lady lying on the ground who is covered in blood. Keith is one of the officers assisting the lady, and he does, in fact, look a lot like Sylvester Stallone. The picture evokes a lot of emotion. You can't tell if the woman on the ground is alive or not, and there is a lot of distress on everybody's faces. Here's Keith Simons to tell the story about the picture.
That morning we have a regular lineup, just a normal day. We got in our police cars, a couple of us decided to go eat at a little cafe. I got an alarm call, so I hop in my car. When someone on the radio comes on and says there was an explosion downtown. Well, I immediately pulled into the center median and looked over my shoulder and saw just a black plume coming up from the skyline. So I immediately turned around and started going that way. There was a lot of radio traffic going on, so it got very confusing, but for whatever reason I was keying in on one officer. That was Sergeant Richard Williams, saying he's got people trapped in the basement. I said, where are you? How can I get to the basement? He said, come in on the east side. Well, the east side of the building has the stairs, and I can't find the stairs because it has a retaining wall. So when I look over there, I see him pop up, and I made eye contact with him. Nothing else has to be said. I ran right straight with him. We went down a flight of stairs, and at the time there was some water about ankle deep. We go through the doors that were still standing. We go through those doors and make it immediate right turn into the building, and all you do is notice nothing but debris. We all know what tornadoes, what that debris looks like. Put all that debris inside a building. That's what we had to go through. So we started going through this, and I'm following him over desks, rocks, pillars, under door frames that were crushed. We're just trying to get to where he had a victim. Now, he had assistance with a civilian that was there, Dean Richards, I believe is his name. And he said, "You stay here and I'll be right back." So in a matter of seconds, they had built a bond and a trust that he goes, "I'll be right back." Well, Dean said, "Okay, I'll be right here." Sergeant Richard Williams comes out, gets me, and we go back in there. It was a tight spot, so we're trying to work around to get to what later we identified as Sharon Littlejohn. When we get to her, it was a real tight space, so we had very little room to work. I said, "You all go get her legs, I'll carry her by her upper body." So I have her head cradled in my arm here underneath her armpit. I am underneath her other armpit and she's facing up. So we start that journey again, and it felt like, oh my gosh, an hour to get through this building, even though maybe in reality it was maybe 4 or 5 minutes. So we're crawling over the stuff, carrying her, trying to keep her above the water, when Sergeant Richard Williams gets tied up in some electrical wires. Let me back up a little bit. When we get to Sharon Littlejohn, there was a water main that was broke, probably about an 8-inch water main that was just dumping water. And so the water level was rising, and Sergeant Richard Williams just wet. He had to stay over that water so it wouldn't drown her. So he did that as we picked her up and started carrying her out. And back to where he got tied up in the electrical wires, we had to set her down, untangle him, pick her back up, and now we finally get out to those 2 doors. And I'm fixing to walk through that second pair of doors, and I noticed that the water's about knee level now. And I'm yelling at her, "Can you hear us? Can you see us? You're going to be okay. Give us some type of a sign, something." Well, I didn't get any verbal response, no real physical response, but I'm starting to lose grip on her. So we got her on upstairs. We laid her down. And at that time, we did not know who she was. Medical personnel was real close. Sergeant Richard Williams and I walked off together, catch our breath, try to organize ourselves to go back into the building, and we turned around and she was gone. They'd already taken her off into the ambulance. Someone did. We don't know who. Our day wasn't over. As police officers, believe it or not, that day, other things were still going on in the city. And since they didn't let us back in, they told us to go ahead and report back to the briefing stations. And I get back to Spring Lake Station. They give us an assignment, and sure enough, there was an armed robbery that went on. And I get into a car pursuit. Ended up catching 2-3 guys for this car pursuit. And that was pretty much the end of the day for me at that moment. Well, after a couple of days afterwards, Sergeant Richard Williams and myself decided we're going to find out who this lady is. So we went to several different hospitals. Couldn't really, and of course with all the rules and the regulations that they have, they can't give us much information. But they said they had a Jane Doe. So we thought we found her. And it really wasn't her, but the civilian that's in this picture, Dean Richards, he says, "I know who that lady was," to Richard Williams, because him and Richard Williams became really good friends. Well, he tells Richard Williams, "Yeah, it's Sharon Littlejohn." Well, great. And how's she doing? Well, she's doing okay. She's lived through it, had several surgeries, but she's pretty much introverted. She's staying in now. She doesn't get out much. We both said, okay, cool. She's alive. That's all we were wanting to know.
Were you involved with testifying at the trial?
Yes and no. They flew me out to Denver, and as an impact witness, a lot of the police officers and family members already testified in the Mcveigh trial, and then came lunch break, and they came in and said, we're done with the impact witnesses, so I didn't get to tell the story. And when I tell the story, I don't tell it for my behalf. I tell it for, obviously, the behalf of the victims. And then, because not every police officer can go that was involved, so they picked a few, and they ended up picking me. So I tell the story of myself, Sergeant Richard Williams, and Dean Richards, because it took all three of us to pull her out. It wasn't an individual effort. It seems like for whatever reason, because of that picture, they're coming to me for this, and I get the spotlight. But I try to tell the story of the three of us that did that. And when he came in and told us that we were done for impact witnesses for the day, it was too emotional for the jury, that we're sending everybody else home, I was kind of shattered, to say the best word to describe it, because, you know, I didn't get to tell that story. I didn't get to tell about this victim and what the efforts took to get her out. But for the Nichols trial in McAlester, Oklahoma, I was able to do that. And so I felt good about the outcome of our efforts again.
But you did it in Nichols and in Denver, too.
Yes, I did.
And that because when we were on the plane going over there, I had been talking to Keith. I went and sat next to Pat Ryan. I said, listen, y'all kept this man, and he was devastated, and he feels like his story needs to be told for this woman and what she suffered and what it took to save her life. I said, please let him testify. Don't cut him this time. And he said, we will make sure he testifies. And so he was able to let their story be heard in Denver. I could not stand to sit in the courtroom during Mcveigh's trial because as people in the courtroom, we were not allowed to show emotion. You couldn't wear pins with your loved one's picture on it, or you couldn't gasp or cry out loud, sob, nothing. You just had to be a quiet observer. And it was really hard when Mcveigh would turn around and look and have this big smirk on his face, and it's almost like he was taunting. And I couldn't stand to be in the courtroom with him. So that's when I would go down. I would help feed the homeless. Anything to get out there.
The hardest thing to do in the trial for me was looking out at the courtroom and all the victims, survivors, family members and stuff. And that burden was just like, oh my gosh, here's all these people. And at the time, and Catherine alluded to it also, that I was in a bad place. It's like, I have failed each and every one of you all. You all had a family member die, you had a family member get hurt, you all got hurt, and I failed you as a police officer. And sitting there in that witness chair testifying, and I look out among those, it's so hard to testify. And I look at them thinking that I'm sorry that I didn't do better, that I couldn't save everybody. But God put me in a place with another police officer, and that's where I had to work.
Well, I guarantee you Sharon Littlejohn's family is grateful.
After years of wondering if the woman whose life he and two other men had saved was alive and well, Keith was eventually given an answer.
Well, several years later, there was a reunion up at the training center. I didn't know if she was going to be there or not, but I went to it. And the reunion was for the purpose of victims meeting, firefighters, police officers, and just getting together, making sure everybody was okay. And as I was sitting there, a young lady walked in. I looked over at Catherine and I said, I think that might be her. But I was to the point that I don't know, am I interrupting something? Am I bringing up bad things? So I said, I don't know if that's her or not. She goes, I'll find out. So she gets up. My wife is not shy about meeting people and talking to people, which is a good thing. She walks up, goes over, and sure enough, that was Sharon Littlejohn. And when they both come walking back to me, it was just a joyful reunion. We hugged each other. She was doing great. We talked and cried, yes. It was a very, very emotional time.
What were some of the words exchanged between you and Sharon in that first reunion?
The first thing for me was, you look great. Compared to what the picture was here, she looked fabulous. And that's what I said. she said thank you, and of course and we get that as police officers and firefighters. A lot of people still. Excuse me. A lot of people tell us thank you. It was our job. It's what we get paid for. Don't thank us. It's what we do. So, anyway, we shared a good moment, and I haven't really made contact with her since then, though.
How did this horrific event affect you in the days and years after?
Well, I was keeping it bottled up, for a better term, and it wasn't until Catherine noticed that I had some issues that I needed to address, and then in Stillwater, I believe her lady's name is Kathy Thomas, held a clinic for the rescue workers, and I went up there, spent, I guess it was about a week, 4 or 5 days up there, and got a lot of things cleared up. So, doing much better. You know, obviously I've met Catherine, my wife. We had a beautiful ceremony at the memorial, and been with her ever since we met. We haven't had a day apart other than maybe business.
That's great. Tell me how long you have been married, Catherine, and kind of describe your wedding day, if you will.
That's good that you addressed the date thing with her.
How long, Keith?
On the spot.
15 years.
I made it easy. We got married in 2000, so the math is pretty simple. It'll be 15 years this October. And his birthday is October 20th, so I planned it October 21st. He can never forget our wedding anniversary.
Pretty clever, huh?
But yeah, we were the first couple to get married at the bomb site. Took a lot of finagling and a lot of paperwork, and we didn't want a huge media spectacle, so we didn't inform the media or anything. We just wanted our close friends and family. And I had a huge poster of my dad made, and we had it in a frame on an easel under the tree, so he was there with us.
Keith, I'll ask you this first. Now that all the dust has settled, is there anything that is still unclear to you, or any questions that you have about the bombing in general and the events that occurred that are still unanswered for you?
No, it's during the trial, they actually pulled me into the attorney's office and stuff, and they showed me the investigation from beginning to end. They showed that he actually led breadcrumbs everywhere. I mean, they could follow this. A blind man could follow this investigation. So I'm quite pleased with the investigation. I'm quite pleased with all the departments that came together to make this thing work, and I'm pleased with the outcome.
I definitely saw God's intervention in that when he got caught. I mean, that was the start. Who bombs a building and drives a car without a tag? You know, it just, you know, because at first everybody thought it was the Middle Easterns that had bombed us, and to find out that it was somebody that was our own, which, in a tale of irony, my husband was a Bradley driver in Desert Storm. Mcveigh was a Bradley driver in Desert Storm. My husband got killed by friendly fire. Mcveigh comes back and kills my dad. So it's a crazy, crazy world.
Yes, it is. If you could speak words directly to Timothy Mcveigh, what would you have to say to him?
I don't have anything to say to him. Nothing. He's not worth my air. I spent a lot of time, a lot of years, very angry. And right after Keith and I went to the closed circuit viewing of his execution, it's like, why do I keep allowing these two to control the emotions of my life? You know, as long as I'm mad at them, as long as I hate them and I seek revenge on them, I'm giving them power to control every thought of my life. And at that point, after we watched him get executed, it was very upsetting. Number one, my dad was crushed, and it took 9 days to find his body. And Mcveigh got 2 holes in his, a hole in his arm and a hole in his leg, and his death was very peaceful, and his family got him back in a few days. The rest of us, our 168 victims, didn't have that. And so, even though I was glad he was gone, it still didn't feel like there was any justice. And so I had to rely on the fact that justice isn't here on earth, justice is with God. And at that point I realized, you know what? I'm done being mad at them. It's not that I completely forgive them. I just don't consider them at all. And I took that power away.
Keith, what would you say to some of the other people who were involved with rescue and recovery, different firefighters, police officers, even people who came out to volunteer their time, who went through similar things and emotions that you have and need to probably address them? Do you have anything you would want to say to them?
Tell your family, let your family know what you're feeling. They've got to know, or they can't help you. If you have to, you and your family get together and go seek help. Do it together as a group. If you don't really want to do that and you want to keep it confidential, just go by yourself, but seek out help. There's nothing wrong with that. Seek out help. You can be the biggest burly guy on the police department or the fire department, but you're still human, bottom line.
He was in a really, really bad place when we were in Denver. And I saw it, and I actually called his command and said, this man needs help, and you need to give him time off to go get help. And so he wasn't real thrilled about it.
It's like your mama calling at work, say, "Don't stop yelling at my son." So yeah.
But he was headed down a dangerous path, and I didn't want him to be another victim of the bombing.
Well, that's what we're hoping to do with this podcast, is show the beautiful things that came out of such a horrible, tragic, awful act of terrorism. And, out of the ashes, something beautiful has happened, and you guys are definitely an inspiration of that. And
thank you.
It's been an honor hearing your stories and how you guys found love through one of the worst events in history. It's pretty awesome.
We think so.
Yeah, we do.
Well, anything else you guys have on your hearts or minds that you want to discuss?
I'm just looking forward to the 20th anniversary. A lot of people quit coming to the memorials, a lot of the family members, and a lot of them have said they'll come to the big ones. And like my mom, she quit coming to the every year ones, and she's going to the every 5. And so it'll be nice to see people that we haven't got to see in a while, and it's just nice to come together and remember, because as long as we're telling their stories, they're not being forgotten.
Absolutely.
Some of the children that survived the thing are in their 20s
Graduating college now.
in
It's
their
crazy.
20s.
I had a patient in Mustang who was in her 20s and still remembered it. She was 3 years old and could tell you about it. It's pretty amazing stories. Thank you guys for joining us today. We appreciate your time and
Thank you.
coming out to share your beautiful and amazing story.
Catherine, even in the midst of her own grief, was able to recognize the warning signs of a man in need of help. Keith, a police officer responsible for rescuing victims of the Murrah bombing, was himself in need of a divine rescuing. And the end result was a love connection. Love has a way of conquering evil. In our next episode, we will delve into the Mcveigh and Nichols trials. Until then, I'm Brenda Bennett, and this has been realmysteries.us.
Real Mysteries is brought to you in part by Roadrunner Press. Sign up or download today at realmysteries.us. And be sure to visit the Oklahoma Memorial and Museum either in person or at their website, oklahomacitynationalmemorial.org.